Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a system that sits right on the edge of, well, life and death.
It really does.
It's this fundamental balance between life-saving clotting,
Mm.
which we call hemostasis, and on the other hand, belly blockages, which is thrombosis.
And that is the entire mission of this deep dive. We're getting into chapter 55, hemostasis and thrombosis. For you, the listener, understanding this is just, it's critical.
Like so critical.
Because, I mean, globally, thrombosis in the coronary and cerebral arteries, they're leading causes of death. We're talking about a really delicate, dynamic biochemical equilibrium.
Right.
And, any kind of rational medical management, it requires absolute precision in knowing how platelet activation, coagulation, and fibrinolysis all work together.
So, okay, we have these two different scenarios. On one hand, stopping a wound from bleeding hemostasis,
A good kind of clotting.
and then an unwanted internal blockage thrombosis.
Yeah,
But they're using the same molecular tools.
they absolutely are.
Mm.
Hemostasis is the body's proper response to, say, a severed vessel. It's just
Yeah.
aimed at stopping blood loss. Thrombosis is, well, it's a misplaced or excessive use of that exact same system.
Like when an atherosclerotic plaque ruptures.
Exactly. When that happens, it exposes the subendothelial tissue, and the body thinks it's a major injury.
What's great about the sources here is how they structure it. So whether it's good clotting or bad clotting, it follows three shared phases. Can you lay that sequence out for us?
Sure. So it all starts instantly with vasoconstriction, to limit blood flow to the area. Then phase 1.
Okay.
That's the formation of a loose primary platelet aggregate. Platelets just rush in, they bind to the damaged site, they activate, and they form a temporary plug.
Just a temporary plug, so it needs reinforcement.
It definitely needs reinforcement. That's phase 2, where the body creates, like you said before, the biochemical concrete.
Fibrin.
Exactly. Specialized plasma proteins get activated to create this strong, durable, cross-linked fibrin mesh that stabilizes the whole thing.
And then phase 3.
Phase 3 is dissolution, or what we call fibrinolysis. The entire structure is broken down, partially or completely, and removed by an enzyme called plasmin once the vessel's healed.
Before we zoom into the chemistry, we should probably note that these clots, they look different depending on where they form.
That's a key clinical distinction, yeah. It's all about flow dynamics. So where blood flow is rapid, like in an artery, you get what's called a white thrombus.
White because.
It's dominated by platelets and fibrin. There are very few red blood cells trapped in it. But if you have, say, retarded flow or stasis-like in a deep vein,
PVT.
right, you get a red thrombus, and that's just full of trapped red cells and fibrin. It looks much more like a clot you'd see in a test tube. And then you have the third type, which is just fine fibrin deposits in tiny capillaries.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning then.
Mm.
The platelet. This is where it gets really interesting for me. How does this resting disc-shaped cell suddenly turn into a sticky spreading barrier?
Well, the initial step is adhesion. The platelet has to physically stick to the exposed collagen in the vessel wall.
How does it do that?
It uses specific glycoprotein complexes on its surface. The main ones are GPII and GPVI.
Okay. But what if the blood is just rushing past that damage? I mean, at high velocity, surely that plug won't hold.
And it wouldn't. That's where von Willebrand factor, or VWF, comes in.
VWF.
Think of it as molecular duct tape. Under high shear stress, like in small vessels or stenosed arteries, VWF binds to the collagen first, and then the platelet's GPIA-IXV complex binds to the VWF.
So it's a bridge.
It's an essential bridge that makes sure the platelet sticks, even against that rapid flow.
So once they've adhered, the signal has to get inside the cell to trigger everything else. What starts that chain reaction?
The most potent external messenger is thrombin.
Thrombin.
Thrombin binds to these specific G-protein coupled receptors, PR1 and PR4, and this is that classic outside-in signaling that just flips the switch.
Okay, so the switch is flipped. The binding activates an enzyme inside the cell.
Correct. It activates phospholipase, or PLC.
So PLC is the first domino to fall inside the cell. What does it do?
It takes a membrane phospholipid called PIP2 and hydrolyzes it, splitting it into two immediate internal messengers.
Two messengers.
The first is DAG, diacylglycerol. That activates protein kinase C, which leads to aggregation and the release of the granule contents.
And the second messenger.
The second is IP3, inositol trisphosphate. Its job is to cause a swift release of calcium from internal storage. And that calcium burst is what causes the platelet to instantly change shape, from that smooth disc into a spiky sphere ready for action.
It sounds like it's not just a single trigger, though. It sounds more like an amplification loop. How does the platelet fuel its own spread?
It is a huge positive feedback loop. The initial collagen binding also liberates arachidonic acid, which gets converted into thromboxane A2 or TXA2.
TXA2 is.
It is one of the most powerful aggregators known. It binds back onto the platelet surface, which activates even more PLC.
Wow.
And on top of that, the platelet releases ADP from its own granules, which acts on the P2Y12 receptors of neighboring platelets, pulling them into the growing plug.
So we have adhesion, activation, amplification. But we still need the physical glue to link all those activated platelets. That's the inside-out signaling part, right?
Precisely. All of those agents, thrombin, TXA2, ADP, they all trigger a signal from the inside of the platelet back out to a surface receptor called GPIIB-DESIR.
The glue switch.
It's like throwing the glue switch, yeah. This modification dramatically increases the receptor's affinity for fibrinogen. And since fibrinogen is divalent, it can then link two adjacent activated platelets together, forming that tight physical aggregate.
This sounds incredibly explosive. I mean, a rapid-fire chemical process just designed for speed, which means you immediately need checks and balances.
You do. You need the vessel wall itself to put on the brakes.
And that's the job of the endothelial cells.
Yes, the endothelial cells lining the vessel are the gatekeepers. They're constantly working to inhibit clot formation. Their primary tool is synthesizing prostacyclin, or PGI2.
And PGI2 is?
A very, very potent inhibitor of aggregation.
So how does it oppose the power of, thrombin and TAKs2?
Yeah. It works by elevating intraplatelet CMP levels. If you remember, IP3 triggered that calcium release for activation.
Right.
Well, CMP actively opposes that calcium release. It's a direct biochemical counterpoint.
And that counterpoint, that balance, that's the basis for aspirin, isn't it?
It is. This is exactly how aspirin works. It comes in and irreversibly inhibits the COX-1 enzyme in the platelet, blocking the creation of the aggregator, TXA2.
The key word there is irreversibly.
That's the whole story, because aspirin also hits COX-1 in the endothelial cells, which reduces their production of the inhibitor, PGI2.
But
However, endothelial cells are nucleated. They can just synthesize new COX-1 very quickly. Platelets have no nucleus. They can't.
so one dose of aspirin knocks out TXA2 production in that group of platelets for their entire 10-day lifespan, while the vessel wall restores its protective PGI2 shield within hours.
That's the net therapeutic effect. The overall balance just shifts overwhelmingly toward anti-aggregation. It's a marvelous biochemical trick.
And there are other drugs that target this system too, right?
Oh yeah, like clopidogrel, which blocks that ADP receptor, P2Y12, or even drugs like abciximab, which block the final glue complex, GPIIB-ICA, directly.
Okay, so the loose platelet plug is in place. Now we need the concrete fibrin. This is where that famous coagulation cascade begins.
It is. And it's all about proteolytic conversions. We're turning inactive zymogens into active serine proteases. That's why the active factors have that little A suffix.
And we also have the essential cofactors like factor V and factor VIII.
And we can't forget the group that's so important for pharmacology, the vitamin K-dependent factors.
Right, factors 2, which is prothrombin, the whole 7, NiX and X, plus the inhibitors, protein C and S.
All of them need vitamin K for a modification called gamma carboxylation. These little GLA residues are what let the factors bind calcium and assemble correctly on the platelet surface. No GLA residues, no functional complex.
Let's follow the activation path. The whole thing starts with the extrinsic pathway, the tripwire.
That's a great way to put it. The extrinsic pathway is the initiation signal. When there's an injury, tissue factor, or TF, is exposed.
And TF isn't an enzyme.
No, it's a cofactor for factor area. They immediately assemble the extrinsic tenese complex on the membrane, and that complex activates factor X to factor zera. That's the initial burst.
And the body is ready to stop that burst immediately.
Instantly. There's a circulating inhibitor called tissue factor pathway inhibitor, TFPI. It inhibits factor zera, and then that zera TFPI complex feeds back to shut down the original VIA TF complex. It keeps the initiation small and controlled.
So if the extrinsic pathway is the tripwire, the intrinsic pathway is the dynamite that amplifies the signal.
A perfect analogy. The intrinsic pathway is defined by contact activation factors. The key step is where factor ERA activates factor IX to AXA.
Oh, yeah.
This AXA then partners with the cofactor factor ERA to form the intrinsic tenese complex.
And its job is also to activate factor X to zera.
Yes, that's the convergence point. But what's really fascinating is that deficiencies in the very first intrinsic factors, like factor 12, they don't cause serious bleeding.
So what does that tell us?
It tells us the intrinsic pathway's main physiological role isn't initiation, but massively amplifying the small amount of factor Z that was created by that extrinsic tripwire.
So regardless of where it came from, factor S is now active, and we move to the final common path, which culminates in the star enzyme, thrombin.
Right. Factor Z forms the prothrombinase complex. It pairs up with the cofactor factor V and calcium. This complex is what cleaves prothrombin, which is factor 2, to generate active thrombin, factor V.
And factor V is a big deal here.
It's a huge deal. It's activated by trace amounts of thrombin, and it accelerates the step by about 300,000 times.
Wow. And thrombin itself is a dual-role superstar. It's an enzyme, but it also activates the platelets from earlier.
It's the ultimate feedback loop. For its main job in coagulation, thrombin acts on fibrinogen. It hydrolyzes 4 bonds and releases 2 small peptides, the fibrinopeptides A and B.
And once those are gone, the fibrin monomers are free to just spontaneously polymerize.
They do. They form these unstable protofibrils. But to stabilize this, thrombin also activates factor 13 to factor 13, which is a transglutaminase.
And that's what cross-links everything.
It covalently cross-links the fibrin molecules, forming stable isopeptide bonds. This hardens the clot into a strong proteolysis-resistant mesh that locks the plug in place.
If this system is this explosive, how does the body stop a clot from a small nick from, propagating down the entire vessel?
This is where the control mechanisms come in. They are just as critical. The single most important circulating inhibitor is antithrombin.
Antithrombin.
It's responsible for about 75% of total inhibition. It neutralizes thrombin and factor XAN.
And this is where a drug like heparin comes in.
Exactly. Heparin is a sulfated sugar molecule that binds to antithrombin. This binding causes a conformational change that accelerates antithrombin's activity by up to 1,000 times. That's why we use low molecular weight heparins.
Beyond antithrombin, there's another really elegant system, the protein C and S system. This is where thrombin literally flips its role.
It's a brilliant mechanism. When thrombin leaves the clot and binds to thrombomodulin, a receptor on the endothelial surface, it completely changes its target.
It stops acting on fibrinogen.
Right. Instead, this thrombin thrombomodulin complex activates protein C. Activated protein C, partnered with its cofactor protein S, then goes and systematically degrades factor VA and factor eta.
Wait, so it degrades the 2 key cofactors in the prothrombinase and intrinsic tenese complexes.
It does. It effectively switches off the 2 main amplification steps in the entire cascade.
Which is how it stops the clot from spreading.
Precisely. And this gives us a powerful clinical correlation. The genetic mutation factor V-Leiden makes factor V resistant to being inactivated by activated protein C.
So the off switch is broken.
The off switch is broken for that factor. The person lives with a permanent pro-clotting equilibrium, which leads to a significantly increased risk of venous thrombosis.
Speaking of controls, let's touch on the classic oral anticoagulant, warfarin. How does that work?
Warfarin targets those vitamin K-dependent factors we talked about. It inhibits the enzyme that regenerates active vitamin K.
So without vitamin K,
the gamma carboxylation can't happen. The factors are made, but they don't have those GLA residues, so they can't bind calcium and can't assemble on the membrane. They're duds.
And that explains the time lag for warfarin to work. You're waiting for the old functional factors to clear out.
Exactly, and why we use the PT test to monitor it. But of course, now we also rely heavily on the new oral anticoagulants, the NOACs.
Right.
Like rivaroxaban or dabigatran. Their advantage is they're direct inhibitors of either factors S or thrombin, so their effects are much more predictable.
Okay, now what about when the system fails genetically, leading to bleeding? The hemophilias.
Hemophilia A is the most common severe one. It's an X-linked deficiency of factor VIII. Hemophilia B is an X-linked deficiency of factor IXX. Treatment has moved to recombinant factors, and gene therapy is the big hope.
But the most common hereditary bleeding disorder of all is von Willebrand disease.
By far. It has up to a 1% prevalence. It's a defect in VWF, and remember VWF's dual function.
Right. It helps platelets adhere under high shear.
And it also acts as a carrier protein to stabilize factor VIII. So VWF deficiency compromises both the primary platelet plug and the secondary coagulation cascade.
Okay, so finally, healing is done. We need to dissolve the clot. The cleanup crew. Fibrinolysis.
Fibrinolysis is the regulated dissolution of that stable fibrin mesh. The key enzyme here is plasmin, which circulates as inactive plasminogen.
And the main activator is tissue plasminogen activator, or TPA, but it's highly selective.
It is. TPA is released from the endothelium, but it's only really active when it's bound to fibrin. Since plasminogen also binds to the clot, TTA generates plasmin right there on the fibrin surface.
So it's localized.
It's highly localized, and plasmin bound to fibrin is protected from a fast-acting inhibitor called additive-antiplasmin. This spatial protection ensures plasmin is only active where the clot is.
Which makes recombinant TPA the perfect clotbuster drug for a heart attack or stroke.
Precisely. Its selectivity is key. But even this has a break. An inhibitor called TAFIA is activated by thrombin during clotting, and it makes the fibrin harder to break down, just to ensure the clot has time to stabilize before cleanup begins.
We've covered a huge amount of ground. We can wrap up by just mentioning the basic lab tests.
Right. The APTT, or activated partial thromboplastin time, measures the intrinsic pathway, and we use it to monitor heparin. The P2, or prothrombin time, measures the extrinsic pathway, and that's for monitoring warfarin.
So if you were to boil it all down for the listener,
Okay, so if you only take 3 things away, hemostasis is a finely regulated sequence. It starts with rapid platelet activation driven by TXA2 and calcium to form a temporary plug. This is followed by the explosive amplification of the coagulation cascade,
the tripwire and the dynamite.
the tripwire and the dynamite, culminating in stable fibrin. And crucially, the whole system is held in check by powerful, localized controls like antithrombin and that elegant protein CS system.
So what does this all mean? I mean, the complexity of this system is just breathtaking. When you consider the sheer fragility that a single amino acid change in one protein, like the mutation we see in factor V Leiden, can entirely shift this dynamic equilibrium.
It's incredible.
You are constantly balancing on this molecular tightrope where the most microscopic changes in protein structure determine whether you clot to death or bleed uncontrollably. It's an evolutionary marvel and, well, a constant medical challenge.
Indeed. It's an elegant, dangerous, and absolutely essential system.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into molecular hematology. We'll catch you next time.